The SACP member who was incarcerated in Eswatini for 14 years has been laid to rest at his home village of Makonde outside Thohoyandou in Limpopo. Amos Mbedzi was sentenced to 85 years imprisonment after a bomb explosion. The Eswatini government said Mbedzi and his two accomplices were setting up a bomb when it exploded prematurely, injuring Mbedzi and killing his accomplices. Our reporter Koketso Motau attended the funeral.
You have described Mr. Mbedzi as one of the heroes of the SACP, an internationalist, and you're also saying that you want Amos Mbedzi III to be held liable and pay for what he did, and obviously to his death as well. Could you please take us through why SACP is thinking that Mr. Amos Mbedzi was actually directly involved in the death of Mr. Mbedzi?
Firstly, Swaziland is a dictatorship under King Mswati III. He had abrogated through his father, then King Sobukwe II, the Swazi constitution in 1973 and unleashed what we call the 1973 decree on the 12th of April. That decree bans all political parties. He controls the judiciary, the legislature, as well as the executive. All those powers are vested in him. He's an absolute monarch. So there's no democratic system that ever works, whether it's the judiciary or any other institution. To this regard, he had used this to abuse his powers, either to offer mercies to those that he wants to turn aside. But in this case, he could not succeed, even on Comrade Mbedzi and other revolutionaries in Swaziland. So in this case, when he was sick, they denied him medical attention. He had double stroke when he was in prison. They still denied him access to medication. We had to provide some healthcare services from this side, working with some of the comrades inside Swaziland, to try and patch up where the government system was failing. They did not even look after him. They only allowed 1 or 2 prisoners to look after him. So they abdicated their duties, and South Africa must hold them accountable for one of their own citizens. I've never seen a country that doesn't care about the death of its own citizens or the ill treatment of one of its own citizens, like how we are behaving in this country. And we took long to take action against this Swazi government.
You're saying you took long. What is it that should be done now to ensure that the people of Swaziland are also liberated?
We have to intensify solidarity work and give political support both to the liberation forces in Swaziland and put pressure on the government of Swaziland to democratize and make sure that they respect SADC protocols, and also ensure that, for instance, they cannot be part and parcel of the SADC institutions when they are practicing dictatorship and oppressing people with no rights. Last year, Swaziland killed no less than 70 comrades for just coming to the streets to protest against dictatorship, and also the way in which the government was handling the COVID crisis in Swaziland. Yet the world has kept quiet. South Africa has kept quiet. The affirmation of our facilitation for talks, Mswati doesn't respect those talks. That is why they actually even started by insulting the ANC through this King Mswati, that the ANC must focus on South Africa and leave Swaziland. Swaziland is part of us. We are part of Swaziland. We can't get rid of our own issues without getting rid of the issues people of Swaziland are facing of oppression by this dictatorship. So Mswati is held directly responsible by the SACP for killing Comrade Amos Mbedzi.
All right, so lastly, how are you going to ensure that the legacy of Mr. Amos Mbedzi continues as the SACP?
We are going to discuss this matter with the family and other structures of the movement to see how to sustain his legacy, because one of his greatest achievements, which sometimes we don't celebrate in this country, is the fact that he has become the foremost internationalist coming out of our country in modern times. All other international work that South African liberation fighters have done, they've done that with self-interest, if you like. When we went through the Wanken Spolilo operations, we were also trying to create a road for us to come back home. When General Dambuza, his commander, fought alongside Frelimo forces against Renamo in Mozambique, he had met the Frelimo forces in battle in the bush. So it was a coincidence of cooperation. And in other many instances, we have one of our internationalists who fought in Cuba, who happened to arrive in Cuba on the eve of January 1, 1959, when Cuba was getting liberated. So he himself joined the Cuban liberation. This one, Amos Mbedzi, consciously became an internationalist and joined the Swazi struggle, and he martyred for that particular struggle, killed by the dictatorship in Swaziland. So he has elevated the value of our own liberation struggle to understand what international solidarity is about.
Well, Mr. Mapaila, thank you so much for joining us here on SABC News. That is the first Deputy Secretary of the SACP, Mr. Mapaila. You know, the SACP has described Mr. Amos Mbedzi as one of the internationalists who dedicated his life to the liberation of the Swazi people.